Roundtable on Motherhood in Film, Literature, and the Medical Humanities. This meeting will be recorded, so if your colleagues, friends, or anybody interested in the topic, the recording will be made available later on. So just a few words on how this idea started. Megan and I met at the NEMLA this year, the Northeast Modern Language Association, and we discovered that we are working on similar topics and we share similar interests. So we decided to organize a roundtable that could bring together scholars from different disciplines and fields who work on motherhood. And this is the idea, to have an interdisciplinary roundtable today where we can share how motherhood should be integrated in our classes, in our research, and in our readings as well. Just a few words about my experience. My interests revolve around representations of motherhood in literature, cinema, and the medical humanities. And this semester, I teach a class on motherhood in contemporary Italian cinema, and some of my students are here. Thank you for coming. So this roundtable is a great opportunity to broaden some of the topics that we have addressed during the semester. I'd like to thank the Department of Romance, German, and Slavic Languages and Literature for co-sponsoring the event. And now I know that Megan would like to say a few words too.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for coming here. This is really exciting for me. I'm, as a graduate student in the English department here, and studying the intersections of motherhood and disability, and getting together scholars from both Georgetown and GW is something that should happen more, and is very exciting, especially around a topic that's not always discussed in academic settings. And yeah, I want to thank the English department for also co-sponsoring this event, and and myself coming back to graduate school after a 10-year break due to motherhood. It's a very important topic, to my life, and to see people coming together for this is very exciting.
Thank you, Megan. So we can start. We're going to have some presentations from our guests today, and then there will be time for questions or comments at the end of the presentations. So we're going to start with Pamela Fox and Elizabeth Velez. Pamela Fox is professor of English at Georgetown University. She received her BA and MA from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign and earned her PhD in English from the University of Washington. She is a feminist scholar of literary cultural studies whose research and teaching encompass the fields of feminist studies, working class studies, critical race studies, motherhood studies, adoption studies, and popular music studies. Elizabeth Velez is an academic director of the Community Scholars Program at Georgetown University, an academic program focused on critical writing and reading for first-generation students, and a professional lecturer in the Department of Women's Studies, in the program of Women's Studies. She teaches motherhood studies, feminist theory, 60s cultural history, and poetry. A writer and journalist, she has covered feminist issues for national publications for the past 10 years. And Pamela Fox and Elizabeth Velez are also the founder of Reading Motherhood, a blog that aims to speak and contribute to discussions about motherhood, reproductive rights, and feminism, and their intersections with gender expression, sexuality, race, and class. And today, Pamela Fox and Elizabeth Velez are talking about teaching and reading motherhood in literature courses. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks. Good morning. Elizabeth and I are both really pleased to be here. So we're here to share our thoughts about teaching reproductive justice through literature and other kinds of media in the university classroom. So we created the course Reading Motherhood 16 years ago at Georgetown. It doesn't seem like that long. But particularly in the past 3 years, we've seen how women's reproductive rights and conditions are particularly under siege when right-wing regimes exploit its citizens' fears in uncertain times to achieve their political ends, and we only see this more and more happening. Motherhood is the definitive component of reproductive justice philosophy. Quote, and this is from the collective Sister Song, the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And as we've discovered, college-age students are particularly hungry to learn about this gendered cultural role as both an entrenched myth or set of myths and a very real, diverse material set of experiences. This paper today functions as a teaching resource, but also as a kind of autoethnographic narrative of our own transformation to achieve, over time, a truly, I would say, inclusive pedagogical approach to this topic. Over those years, our highly diverse groups of students have equally taught us to be more flexible and open to what we thought we knew about motherhood as institution, representation, and individual practice. In true collaboration, they have pushed us to rethink our analytic frameworks as teachers, writers, and mothers. So in the time we have, we'll provide an overview of the course itself and briefly demonstrate how, at least for us, cultural texts about motherhood actually work in educational spaces, not what we imagine they will accomplish before we walk into the classroom, but all of that sort of magic that happens or doesn't happen, right, within a particular classroom. The course sprang from a mixture of our feminist philosophies and varied forms of activism and our personal experiences as mothers. However, we felt a bit at sea when in 2007 we actually began to sketch out a coherent syllabus. Motherhood was a staple of feminist theories from the 1970s to the 1990s, but in the first decade of the 21st century, we found almost no offerings of humanities college courses on the subject itself. It was enlightening, if dismaying, to discover that almost no higher education courses took up motherhood at all, except for nursing classes or the occasional sociology or psychology course on family dynamics. In fact, when we first taught it, at least, and this still happens actually, at least a handful of our students routinely thought that they were signing up for a practicum on mothering as a serious field in its own right? They thought, we were teaching them how to be a good mom. It seemed impossible to conceive of motherhood as a serious field in its own right at that point.
So, yes, just to sort of move from what Pam was saying, it is true that we had students who thought, okay, we're going to learn how to be mothers. Georgetown, as you know, is a Catholic university. It seemed like a perfect English class. So, some of them were surprised. We have had students even say to us, wait, is this an anti-motherhood class? No, we're talking reality. Part of the So we put the course together in a sort of chronological, historical kind of way. It's really motherhood in the U.S. it's more global now, since post-war, since 1945. So we're looking at literature in the 50s, 60s, 70s. We're also looking at theory that has to do with motherhood. So we've incorporated varieties of feminist and critical race theory, U.S. history, sociological data. The syllabus then traces the development of motherhood iconography, thank you, from post-World War II up until the present. We do a lot of work with media, literary, popular culture narratives, and they're sort of the primary tools, we think, of teaching maternal ideology, so that every photograph on the cover of People magazine with a celebrity and their baby bump and their children are talking to all of us about this is what a mother is, this is what a mother should be. We have a diverse collection of motherhood-based fiction, film, poetry, and streaming texts. We've included TV shows from I Love Lucy. We've looked at The Last Daughter, added that, the Ferrante film. Rosemary's Baby is one of the students' favorite.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a central text in terms of looking at, wait, maybe this is a film about normal motherhood in the 1960s in the United States. We've tried to decenter mainstream depictions of motherhood, particularly, and this is where I think early on we had to rethink the course from year to year. This idea of the media obsession with white, cisgender, middle-class versions of either opting out of the workplace or trying to have it all. So this whole business of having it all, like, no, this is not what we're teaching. We're not teaching you how to be a good mother and have it all because there's whatever that means. It's certainly a mainstream, dominant cultural look at motherhood. As we often tell our students, we are in this with them to the extent that these ideals inhabit our own heads in the ways in which we, as mothers, Pam has a daughter who was adopted. I have 2 sons and 2 grandsons, so I'm the grandmother of boys. But that the ideas that are floating out there are firmly in our own heads, and that part of our job is always to decolonize what's up here. We look at Patricia Hill Collins' Shifting the Center, Race, Class, and Feminist Theorizing about Motherhood, which offers the idea that all of the media is about white women who often, they live alone. There's a whole issue of isolation. You're supposed to have a baby with a man, go live someplace, and suddenly there is a woman and a child or 2 children in this sort of isolation. And the idea that that is what motherhood is, Patricia Hill Collins talks about the cultural differences. We have communities that mother. She uses this term called other mother. We particularly look at Collins' emphasis on that values children of color survival and community identity, and the ways in which anti-racist education is part of raising a child of color. One of the things that we found is that poetry for a long time was not seen as, didn't write about domestic life. We look particularly at a group of Black women poets who wrote 60s, 70s, Gwendolyn Brooks, Audre Lorde, Lucille Clifton. The novel, one of the novels that we read is Toni Morrison's Beloved, and look at the many, many depictions of motherhood in that novel. I think we should put it here. I'm trying to watch time.
Okay. Right, so part of what we're trying to say here is that we were starting this course, right, and we were trying to do what we could, but we saw in hindsight when we were really thinking about how often we've taught this class and how it's changed, we were thinking, I was just saying, it's like we didn't yet have a through line, a really clear through line about reproductive justice, right, within this course. I think we were trying to do that, but it wasn't working out very well. So even when we were talking about Beloved, right, the novel Beloved, the framing theory for that novel is dominated by work that was focusing on the travails and gains of white motherhood in the 80s, right, which was when it was published. So somebody like Sarah Ruddick was sort of the entree into Beloved, which was weird, right? So despite these significant missteps, our initial enrollments attracted 40 to 50 students, almost half of them BIPOC and a sprinkling of men. Nearly all were fixated on its significance, and I think this is really important, with their own life trajectories and evolving identities. Although they appreciated the course's historical context and thought the theories of motherhood were interesting and illuminating, they ultimately prized the intimate forms of knowledge that they gained when we were thinking about their own families, right? And what they think they're starting themselves to think, well, I thought I was just going to be a mother, but maybe I need to think this through. And so we found, so the other thing that was very unique, this certainly hasn't happened, or maybe it has happened in other courses that you or I have taught, but many of them shared their course materials with their own mothers. And the mothers kind of became virtual course students themselves in the class. And we thought that dynamic was really quite moving and a key motivation in sharing our course more publicly with the Reading Motherhood website. But it also pushed us to, devise a more diverse approach, not only to the topic, but to our classroom environment. And so each successive syllabus became more inclusive, resulting in the current default model that centers mothers of color crossing all class and sexuality lines who labor outside as well as inside the home and articulate different versions of reproductive justice aims. So the lengthier opening unit now encompasses the full range of contemporary motherhood practices and critiques, including Roxana Badruja's concept of new maternalisms within diverse spaces. Along with Collins, we read journalistic, creative, and academic practices by Black, trans, Latinx, Asian American, and queer mothers. Autobiographical work staging the conflicts between Alice Walker and her daughter Rebecca. We took up teen mothers' own creative methods of challenging the long-standing stigma around young motherhood through their savvy handling of social media platforms. So this is over here. So we also gradually, let's see where I'm sorry. Here we go, yes. We also gradually reconceived our course materials by addressing how Western political relations are increasingly embedded in global circuits of motherhood via transnational adoption, surrogacy, reproductive technologies, as well as disruptive flows of child caretaking between sending and receiving nations. So we'd like, if we have time, to describe briefly our adventures in unteaching motherhood via two key moments in the course, and we'll start with Elizabeth with the 1970s poetry.
So we just want to take these examples of concrete things that we do in the class. So we frame analyses and discussions of poetry, as I said, 1960s and 70s poetry by Black women. And I just want to talk about that for a few minutes, and Pam's going to talk some about the novel Afterbirth. We routinely teach Gwendolyn Brooks' The Mother and Lucille Clifton's The Lost Baby poem. Both of these poems are key in terms of talking about reproductive justice. Both poems portray women addressing their lost children through abortion. But as they suggest, these speakers also remain forever mothers to their memory. And I do just want to say, we do a section on abortion as part of reproductive justice, but to look at these poems in a different way. Obviously, we are very supportive of reproductive justice, of women's rights, but to look at these poems in a broader way. Clifton's poem deploys spatial techniques, line with punctuation, to literally represent the child's absence and recounts its justifications. You would have been born into winter in the year of the disconnected gas and no car. And there's his face. We would have made a thin walk over Denise Hill into the Canada wind to watch you slip like ice into strangers' hands. The mother stands out for its bold first line, an unspeakable word. Abortions will not let you forget. So Brooks presents an intricate and controversial take on the centerpiece of reproductive politics. The speaker shifts from second person to first person to conflicting voices and arguments about who or what is responsible and the psychic consequences of the act. I have said, sweet, if I sinned, it's from the poem, if I seized your luck and your lives from your unfinished reach, if I poisoned the beginnings of your breath, believe that even in my deliberateness I was not deliberate, which that line I think is so important. Believe me, I loved you all. Our students prize these poems. Brooks' piece provokes critique from the students from the suggestion that abortion is a crime. But partner discussions, the entire class, look at these complex and complexities through very nuanced, close readings. and I'm going to stop here, but I think the one thing I would say is Sylvia Plath once said something like, no magazine wants to publish a poem about children and babies. So for these poets to be writing about these issues at this particular time was a kind of resistance against the overall literary scene that valued poets like Robert Frost and many more. But to read these poets is to see there was a lot more happening in the United States. And I know I don't want us to go over some of the stuff.
Okay. So, let's see.
I think you want to.
I'm right. So, okay. So, has anybody read this novel called Afterbirth? Okay. So, one recent novel has provoked and attracted nearly all of our students. It was published in 2015. Most of our students adored its quirky prose style and snarky women's studies grad student narrator named Ari, short for Ariel, title to Plath's final poetry collection before she committed suicide. Elizabeth and I also found it a compelling read and saw how it might be seductive to college-age women who could identify with Ari's personality and interest in gender studies, and perhaps for some, her race, heterosexual, and class privileges. We worried, though, about its representations of academic as well as activist feminism that endorsed essentialist ideas about the maternal body's power to give birth. In its own way, Afterbirth also aspires to be a reproductive justice narrative, recounting its protagonist's depression and self-loathing after she is forced to have a C-section, which she does not call a birth. She calls, birth is the great privilege, but instead gut it like a fucking fish. Ari condemns Shulamith Firestone's vision of a mechanical womb and embraces 1970s goddess worship. She changes her dissertation topic from women's studies community building to wet nursing as a radical feminist political act. She refreshingly reveals her maternal ambivalence toward her young son, yet also suggests that women are superior caretakers and should be lauded for their biological skill set. The novel is at once an impassioned excoriation of the patriarchal birth industry complex and a fetishization of women's reproductive capabilities. Afterbirth was originally meant to function in our course at the first time we taught it as an exemplar of the insidious ways that whiteness, heteronormativity, and economic security continue to shape feminist motherhood narratives. But after teaching this text 3 times over the past 7 years, we've come to understand that we are still failing to meet at least some of our students' needs if we continue to prioritize our own textual readings over theirs. Albert's novel continues to speak to young women and men, I would say too, of all political leanings and demographics for complicated and sometimes seemingly irrational reasons. So while we chafe at Albert's hyperbole in deeming her book a war novel, i.e. women's traumatic combat with the pregnancy industrial complex, we've come to affirm these young women's respect for both its brutal honesty and its defense of female embodiment. One Latinx student was compelled to ask her mother about her C-section experiences, which were quite frightening both times, and her mother knew no English to protest. So we have, and this is in the article that's been published about this class, but they start talking to their mothers about their own situations, right? And lots of times they discover that their mothers have had an abortion, right? Or or have had some sort of other traumatic sort of experience. And this is also really important too. We asked our students to, they write these journal entries that are quite profound and sophisticated. And one student said she points to Albert's realist description of postpartum depression and positions it as a breakthrough in motherhood text by representing neurodivergence as another maternal condition. And she says, in order to create a truly intersectional account of mothering, theorists must focus not only on race, sexuality, and socioeconomics, but must look beyond the most visible loci of oppression to account for disability and neurodivergence, including and especially clinical depression. We embrace this thoughtful assessment of the course, helping us to unlearn old, well-worn conceptual patterns. In a course founded in varieties of and contestations to notions of reproductivity, we savor the collaborative dialogue that spurs new knowledge. And then if, if we have time, I probably won't, but we could just show you a little bit of the Reading Motherhood project, digital project. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela and Elizabeth. Now we're going to move on to Megan Jean Harlow. She's a graduate assistant at George Washington University, where she's working on her PhD in English with a focus on Crip studies. Her current research interests are at the intersections of disability rhetoric, feminist studies, visual rhetoric, and embodied argumentation. She's currently exploring concepts surrounding access, agency, and ethics. And today she's going to present on the reading mothers in film and literature.
Okay, yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. And so I'm going to just kind of broadly explore my research interests right now and where I see my research going in my dissertation. So I'm very interested in the complexities of motherhood and the ways in which a lack of imagination to speak about care work, birth, and the embodied experiences surrounding motherhood, which are not unique to just biological mothers, but are shared by intergenerational webs and non-blood kin who take up the task of mother. So I use mother expansively, and in the spirit of queer and crip theory, I want to reclaim mother as a desirable position. And I'm interested in the inadequacy of modern discourse in addressing some of these realities. As a researcher, a poet, and a mother myself of children with disabilities, and myself identifying as a mad crip mother, I was driven back to school after a decade working as an adjunct, waitress, secretary, business owner, and most importantly, mother. So I decided to come back to school to get my PhD for the second time. I never finished first. And I'm going to begin with some questions that are driving my research at this point. So how does our modern understanding of motherhood as an individual experience fail to capture the full extent of its bodily and emotional complexities? In what ways has the medicalization of childbirth and regulation of sexuality, as described by Foucault, contribute to the marginalization of mothers' experiences? And can a more compassionate discourse on motherhood be constructed? One that can embrace neo-materialism, crip theory, and queer theories to better recognize the diverse experiences of those who give birth and are birthed. As a mother, I've intimately experienced the act of creating life, a profound transformation that transcends the boundaries of our individuality. As two beings emerge from one, this miraculous event challenges modern conceptions of the individual despite its ancient roots. This is a concept of individuality that can be traced back to the Enlightenment and the rise of rational thought. It is, in my thoughts, the very notion of individuality that has led to a dissonance in our understanding of motherhood and care. Considering the medicalization of childbirth, I've looked to Foucault and the concept of biopower, which is the mechanism through which modern society seeks to regulate and control life, including sexuality. As a number of scholars, particularly in anthropology, have looked at the medicalization of childbirth as but one example of biopower, as hospitals and medical practitioners have increasingly dictated the parameters of the birthing processes, the experiences of birth became further and further separated from an embodied experience. So the approach aimed at mitigating risks and optimizing outcomes has inadvertently silenced the embodied experiences of mothers and made a lack of language for the suffering or pain of childbirth as anything beyond that which should be erased. Furthermore, the relationship between the mother and the fetus with its inherent interconnectedness disrupts the notion of a singular individual experience. Now, this intertwined existence is not easily reconciled with our modern understanding of the self, which leads to a portrayal of the mother as a monstrous figure. So following the work of neo-materialist feminists such as Carrie Berard, I want to read the motherhood as a bodily intra-action and step into the messy space of fetal-mother divides. Now, while this terrain is very complicated and the work of feminists to fight for the right of reproductive freedom is very important, especially in the current politics going on with rights being stripped away, but it still is important to go to these messy spaces of motherhood in order to challenge the very foundations of Western individualism. And so I believe that this can help us think beyond an us-them politics and beyond a body thought divide that can help us begin to think about ways that care work and motherhood challenge these fundamental notions. So I'm working a lot with crip theory, which challenges ableist norms that pervade our society, which pushes us to re-examine the ways in which the performance of ability is compulsory, and through combining queer and disability theory, it speaks to the power of embracing a resistant position. As Robert McCruer writes, instead of a banal humanistic universalization of queerness disability, a crip theory of composition advocates for the temporary or contingent universalization of queerness disability. So I'm talking about, yes, disabled mothers and disabled children, but also the mother-child dynamic, in fact, may be seen as possibly as a disabled in a certain aspect in our current society. So I am also looking at David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder's Politics of Atypicality, in which they talk about cerebral palsy as a diagnosis which is really only shared by its atypicality. And that can be a politics of uniting difference. And so perhaps something that can unite motherhood as a political concept and care is the fact that every mother's experience is atypical. In literature, we find powerful expressions of motherhood experience that defy our limitations of how we currently look at mothers. So I'm taking kind of a broad look, starting with Kate Chopin, arguing that the awakening is one position in history and in literature that sort of begins to draw out this figure of the mad mother. And so Kate Chopin offers us the story of Edna Pontellier, a woman who struggles with the societal expectations placed upon her as a wife and mother. As Edna awakens to her own desires and ambition, she challenges the traditional role of motherhood. But it is when she's attending a friend's birth and recounting her own birthing experience, which is nearly forgotten due to chloroform, the common anesthesia of the time for wealthy white women, she begins a journey towards the novel's infamous suicide by sea. I'm interested in reinterpreting the ending as a possible opening. We don't see the body being, we don't have a funeral, it's a freeze frame ending. And I believe that in certain ways Kate Chopin's novel can call out to a future author, future mother, and provide us new ways of thinking how one will deal with the difficulties and experiences of having an being defined by one's body, but not being able to reconcile the experience and the body. I look at also Sylvia Plath's poetry, for example, Morning Song, and and so as she writes, I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. Through these lines, Plath is expressing the mother's struggle to reconcile her identity as both an individual and a caregiver, highlighting the difficulty of navigating the emotional landscapes of motherhood. And also looking at Plath's life, obviously there's quite a bit of things to go there with her suicide and all the unfortunate things, but also the power of her poetry to speak to these issues of embodiment that I'm interested in. I also look at Audre Lorde, and also a number of memoirs, but one film that I'm working with right now is the film Good Manners, which is a Brazilian film in which director Julianne Roja explores crip themes through the story of a young woman named Clara who becomes the nanny for the unborn child, Joel, of a wealthy pregnant woman, Anna. So as the film progresses, Clara and Anna's relationship intensifies. This is a queer love story. And Clara eventually discovers the hidden secret beneath the plot, which is Anna is pregnant with a werewolf. So in this speculative fiction world, we have a very powerful story of love, and then Anna dies in childbirth, and Clara takes over the role, and the entire film's tone and genre changes from a fairy tale to more of a horror story. It is very much a genre-breaking film, but I believe that thinking about Clara as a crip doula, which is a concept that's coming up in crip theory, is a way to think about how we can think about mothering and birth outside of a medical context and outside of just a biological. But interestingly, there is some biological connections between Clara and the son, because Anna was feeding off of Clara's blood. This is sort of, but in this speculative world, I think we can begin to imagine what it means to care for Clara to care for her lover, and then to care for their child, who is a werewolf who has to be chained at the full moon in a room. It's a very, and I think as a mother of a disabled child, there's certain ways in which I could relate to this in a strange way, like the feelings of having to go to appointments and do things which, you know, I don't know, there's all these ways in which you have to live by the societal expectations and you feel as though you're disciplining, but you're also, what would you do if you were a mother of a werewolf child, right? So what are the burdens of care and how can that move on? Yeah, and so these are just a few things I'm looking at, and I want to say, like, in a broad way, I'm really hoping to create a new discourse on motherhood, one that can embrace a myriad of experiences of those who give birth and are birthed, and who take on the role of mother. My drive to incarnate the figure of Monster Mother and examine the interplay of madness and motherhood reveal the deeply intricate and diverse natures of maternity as a care framework and an ethical framework. So as we move forward in a world where universals have been criticized and challenged, it is essential that we strive to build a body politic that acknowledges and respects the roots of our existence, our shared experience of birth and motherhood, a fragile, vulnerable universal that is born again and again through love at moments shared for uncertain futures. In the face of a universal threat, climate change, perhaps a return to the body that all have came from can help us think through how to honor the body we are all part of, a radical Mother Earth body politic. By doing so, can we foster a sense of care for the collective that bridges gaps between us and unites us in our common shared present? Shattered as each vision may be, a kaleidoscope can become a collective, a stained glass reflection built together. Can we build a universal that is contingently based in places and in the body?
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Jennifer Natalya Fink. Is a professor of English and core faculty in disability studies at Georgetown University. She's the author of 7 books, including All Our Families, Disability Lineage, and The Future of Kinship, and founder of the Gorilla Press, a non-profit promoting youth literary through bookmaking. Fink is the winner of the Dana Award for the novel and the Catherine Doctoral Prize for Innovative Fiction. And today she is going to talk about parenting disability. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here.
Thank you, and thank you all for such rich, full, and diverse sharings around this topic. I'm going to trouble, I think, this term motherhood a little bit, and this term disability actually a little bit as well, through a couple of thought experiments. So one is, including you guys, I'd love to hear all the characters in film, literature, television, memes, who are disabled parents. Exactly. When we
Gotta be possible.
When we conceptualize disabled people, we conceptualize them as the children of somebody, not the parents of somebody. In fact, there are 4.1 million disabled parents in the United States. They face a 70 to 80% removal rate of their children being removed, those who have physical disabilities, and 40 to 80% removal rate if they have mental disabilities, despite no difference in abuse or neglect rates. All right, so we construct a disabled parent as always already a sort of a failed parent, right? So I want to, get us thinking about that, and know what I'm saying, parent, not mother. We'll get to that in a second. The other thought experiment sort of thing is, what do you say when you are asked if you're pregnant, do you want a boy or a girl? What's the correct answer?
As long as it's healthy.
As long as it's healthy. I don't care. Gender is not a thing, contrary to all evidence. I accept this binary, contrary to Simone de Beauvoir. This isn't a new idea that gender is a made thing, right? As long as it's healthy. It is interesting because obviously gender is a made thing, because we're talking about an it, right? So what am I doing here connecting these things? What I've come to think in my life work and my work as a queer parent of a disabled child is that the fear of disability is really a fear of care that has discrete and differential consequences based on race primarily. For white women, to have a disabled child is to become no longer a social actor, no longer anything but a caregiver, 100%. Right? So there's this collapse back to a reified and retro positionality. For people of color to have a child, and working class people, for anyone who's not a privileged white woman who understands herself as a woman, the result is to be impoverished, to be in a struggle for survival, and to be the caregiver. So also to be, your ability to work is less, right? So why is this connected to this whole as long as it's healthy song that we sing? What I've come to think is that the discourse of motherhood and the discourse of parenting and the discourse of ableism are one discourse. And what they serve to do is cover over the reified, binary, and false conception of parenting, care, and disability that we have. One in which there is a constant lie, a lie perpetuated, that says a disabled child brings with it a care need that can only be filled by somebody called mother, right? And that the rest of society has no responsibility to that person, and that this is a rare, traumatic, to be avoided, aborted, whatever it takes to not have that happen, because we'd rather take it out on that child, and in a sense that person in the position of the mother, than be honest about the deeply cis, het, gendered conception of family that we keep reproducing. So it happens on the back of the disabled child, essentially. In truth, this bogeyman of the disabled child is an interesting one because at birth, less than 0.5 children are actually disabled, but when you get to 60-year-olds, you get somewhere between 40 and 50% of people are disabled. So disability is mostly something acquired and something most of us will have, right? So this figure of the disabled child that threatens this normative family gets reproduced again and again through this as long as it's healthy discourse. What you're going to throw it back if it's not? What is health? What is health? Have you had a child? You know children are mostly not healthy, right? Good luck with that. Good luck with that, right? So that's sort of where I want to trouble both how we think of disability as this thing demanding care from this person called mother, right? Disabled parents actually have an incredible amount of wisdom, and I refer you to Jessica Slice for one person to read, right away about what it means to be a disabled parent, parenting a disabled child, actually. So that erasure of the disabled parent I'm really interested in. And in my own experience, what I found was I would go to parenting groups for parents of disabled children, and my partner and I would be the only couple, and there would be only cishet women. There were no parents, there were just moms. So I've come to actually kind of reject this term mother because it's the way it is the linchpin in this reified system that I think sort of, plus, I'm just in a world that is not binary. My daughter does not, I use the word daughter, she does not identify with any gender. Gender is not an interesting concept to her, that is the norm amongst her peers. So I think that is, to me, the path out in some way of truly changing this structure that many of my colleagues here referred to as a collective kinship structure that already exists in working class Black communities, already exists in queer communities, and rethinking care work and valuing it, paying for it, integrating it, and assuming it is a normal, ordinary part of what it means to be in the world, right? And an obligation of all people, and not actually particularly this person called me mom, right? So I'm done with that a little bit. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about these days in terms of parenting disability. And that's sort of where I see hope in this conversation for me, is reimagining that. I think if we reimagined how we think about parenting and disability, we would actually reimagine kinship as well. And I actually, in my book, have some recipes for revolution. How do you do that in very practical ways here and now? And one way is, instead of reproducing this false narrative of the disabled child versus the parent who has no needs and not considered as disabled, getting rid of that model, but also imagining queer disabled community as the site of care as opposed to the individual parent and caregiver, and seeing disability as identity as well in that. So I guess I'm not invested, I have to say. I'm slightly suspicious and disinvested in this concept of mother. I think I find it reified, and I think a kind of violence to me, actually, as a queer person and as someone who, wants to end the kind of gender system that I'm inside, that I've been interpolated. But the idea that, well, we're all inside it, so we can't change it. It is changing, it has changed, and I'd like to see more of that reflected in parenting discourse. So that's kind of where my provocation to all of that is. And, so easily this turns into this sort of horrible, just degradation, I think, of the positionality that cishet people who call themselves women are stuck in. And I'm not interested in that, but I can't participate. It sort of has nothing to do with me in a funny way, and I become sort of unrecognizable in the culture in all kinds of ways. So I felt that talking about mothering, which I really am going to put in quotes, without sort of the violence of what happens in fathering, I guess, is the other piece of it. And I go to these parenting groups. Parenting equals mothering, actually, in this, right? It is kind of to perpetuate a set of lies and fictions. And I think that has to be done, frankly. So that's kind of where I am in this conversation. And I really implicate myself much more than I am here in a funny way in my book, in all of this, in my own ableism, and in a funny way, despite being, an out queer person, really since I could speak, but it got heard when I was 18, and I'm super old now, in these reified, heteronormative, and I don't want to be included in mothering. I don't want that, actually. actually. I really want to challenge and transform this system. And have to, because of what my life is. And I think that is really where I land in this. So I would keep in mind, both just the deafening silence we all had, myself included, in the representation of disabled parents, right? And the as long as you're healthy discourse, which is a displacement, I think, of the deeply binary, heterogendered construction of family parenting, or all of it. All of which I want to end, actually. So I'll end there.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Now I'm introducing Linda Raphael. Is the Director of Medical Humanities at George Washington University. Linda holds an MA in History, a PhD in English, and studied philosophy as a postgraduate at Oxford University. She was a faculty member at Ohio State University before joining the faculty in the GWU Department of English in 1996. In 2005, she developed courses in narrative and medicine and became the Director of Medical Humanities in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Her research and writing are increasingly directed toward narrative and medicine, including how doctors listen to patients and what patients want in a physician. And today she is going to talk about film, motherhood, and the medical humanities. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, Laura. There's a trouble with putting last, is that you want to refer to everything, right? Yeah, there's this and that. And as I don't have a written paper to give you, because I did catch up with that thing you talked about, a disability. And my disability is visual, unfortunately, because it makes my work harder, not easier. But because of the technology, I am able to read, but I am not able to read papers. I just can't do that. But I can read on the computer, but slowly. I'm not too fast, so I talk instead. But I do want to mention something that I have thought about thinking about the disabilities. One of the fields, organization fields and so on, that I've been connected with very much in my work in medicine and humanities is graphic medicine. And so I imagine you know the graphic medicine world. And it's very rich. It was very kind of natural to me because, of course, I taught many times with representations of the Holocaust in literature and film, and I taught Art Spiegelman's Mouse. So when people are surprised about graphic medicine, what could that be? Of course, that's what happened with Mouse, with Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which was the New York Times put as the #1 under fiction. And Spiegelman said, thank you very much, I wish it were fiction, but my father's Holocaust experience was not. So, as to what I would like to talk about, before I go to the film, I wanted to add something here. Toni K. Bambra, do you know her work? Yes, okay, good. She came to mind while some of you were talking, and I will lose this train. So one of the films that, let me speak a little about medicine and humanities. The sort of courses I have are elective courses for students, sessions in the big lectures, occasionally on older adults or people living with I think that unit is called brain disorder, but usually it's somebody with Parkinson's disease who has been the guest speaker there. And also sessions in all the rotations when students are going through OB-GYN and primary care and surgery, etc. I have sessions with them during that time. So, and then there's a concentration in medicine and humanities, as there are concentrations in emergency medicine, community health, and public health, and so on. So there are a whole variety of things that I do. And film comes in a film and medicine course. That's an elective for second years. And one of the films that I used for the first time this past fall was Almodovar's Parallel Mothers. I had used Almodovar film before, talked to her, and one all about my mother. And I found this Parallel Mothers was really, it's kind of stunning. Does anyone here know that film?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Loved it.
So there was some resistance to it, and also as like, what does this have to do with medicine? I thought, what does it not have? Everything. So in this film, there is two women are in labor in the same room, and one is they're both single women, and one is the Penelope Cruz, who always in Almodovar's films. She's older than the other woman, and it turns out that their babies get switched, and this isn't obviously they don't know it right away, but one of the women, the younger woman, and less the Penelope Lively character is very much settled as an actor, model, very well connected in the world. And the other younger one is from, doesn't have financial deprivation, but she isn't, she's young and not settled in the world. And her baby dies. And she happens to run into the other mother and tell her, and the other mother invites her in to kind of be caretaker for her baby while she's at work. Correct me if I misremember any of
No.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and a very strong relationship develops between the two women. But it also happens that the Penelope Lively, the older mother, begins to become suspicious of whether if this child that she has was hers or whether the babies were switched. And I'm trying to, I can't, how did she become suspicious of that? I can't now picture that exact moment, how that suspicion.
Isn't it about the
came.
race? Isn't it about the skin color?
Yeah, I think so.
That was,
Yeah.
okay.
And there was
Of
a
course.
friend who kept pointing
course.
it
Yeah, the
out.
friend
Oh,
points out
oh,
the skin
yes.
color.
Thank you, yes, of course, that's how
Yeah.
she became suspicious, because the other woman had a relationship with well, actually, she had been raped. hadn't she?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
right.
she had been raped, and so she wasn't positive it was his father, but it was this man with a darker skin. So Penelope Cruz does a test and finds out, and of course that involves science, that we can find out these things, and this was not her baby. And she doesn't reveal it to the other mother immediately, so there's a little period of time where she's living with the ambivalence of what to do. And what surprises the students, and I think maybe surprised a lot of viewers, is that a sexual encounter goes on between the younger, older mothers at some time. And as I discussed it with students, I felt that it was something about mothering and the body and some kind of connection to the body of, this is the body that gave birth to the child who's still living, that this mother had believed for a while is hers, and there's something in the physicality and the connection of the bodies that made sense to me. Not always easy to have medical students get with that. Because, I mean, they're studying in a way that isn't always open to that sort of imagination. And having said that, I say that actually many of them are. Medical students are, they have various backgrounds and so on, as compared to maybe what ones they did. But it is a little bit hard to get to. But the feelings of what it is have a child, to be connected to that child, and the rights of the one mother, because it was her baby, and she gave birth to it, and the other mother, who's had it now about a year, I think, what rights does she have? Almodovar has film, and very happily. So that is a good thing. So there's that sort of film, and another film that I have shown from time, maybe only once or twice. I actually don't, for some reason, students weren't so happy with it. I'm not sure why. But it was Private Lives, and Paul Giamatti stars in that film. And it is about a woman who's in her 40s. The couple has decided they want a child, and she's trying to use IVF, and nothing is working, and they begin to involve his niece, that she will donate an egg, and how complicated it all is, how complicated this science business into the reproductive world is for people. It's not just do it that works. And it ends it ends with things unresolved, and that maybe that's why the students didn't like it. Maybe they wanted a resolution. But I think it's a very good film. But I want to talk for a couple of minutes. How many more minutes do I have?
No, we can still take a few more minutes.
Okay, I wanted to talk about a story. I mentioned Tony K. Famber, and in this one, how interesting the story is in terms of a young girl who starts her period just after a bath, and she doesn't know. She is very confused about what happens. Her brother sees some blood on a towel. Her brother and her grandmother, with whom they live, all suspect that she's had an abortion because her mother died in an attempted abortion. So I guess it was a baby didn't survive. It was a successful abortion. The mother had died. And how this is visited on the daughter, but the daughter finds an alternative. I'm anxious to say mother now. She did. She found an alternative model of a woman who was very inspiring at the community center, and inspired her about their people and the history of Blacks in America, in Africa and so on. So that was another sort of the daughter being held responsible for something that happened, or being held responsible for an act that she hadn't experienced but her mother had, and then finding a mother model in someone that's interesting, like in it. But the one I wanted to speak about a bit now is by a physician who wrote a not entirely benign procedure, which is about the clinical year, the third year of medical school. And Perry Class is her name. And Perry Class was in the OB/GYN clerkship, and she was situated at a clinic that was next to high school. And many girls in that high school came to the clinic because they were pregnant. And race is not mentioned, but this would have been in the 1980s or so, and you know that race is part of the story, even though it isn't mentioned specifically. And the attending, in other words, the student classes teacher says, class says, I don't know why they're having these babies. Anybody in my high school who would become pregnant would have had an abortion. And the attending says, no one in my high school would have become pregnant. And that's hard to believe. Maybe some did, and were whisked away for abortion when one, was pre-Roe v. Wade and now post. And they could have, I think at that time one could have 3 physicians sign on that the person needed, that the woman needed an abortion for mental health or physical health, and that could be done. But you had to have connections. You had to you had to have doctors that would be able to pay. There wasn't insurance even for private visits to doctors. So in any event, this story would be more of the late 80s or 90s, and these girls were coming en masse. And the story is very much about tone of voice, because Perry Klass is trying to make some kind of connection with these young people, and she feels that they are more sophisticated in ways than she is because they're pregnant, and she's not had a baby. She's at the school. She's not thinking about a baby yet. And so she feels she's not sure how to connect with them, and she realizes that her voice is going to make the difference. And something comes out in one's voice that isn't always controllable. But there's quite a bit in that story about teenagers having babies, and then we have a discussion afterwards, and it's very interesting because you can almost break it down to some students who say that is their culture and that's what they want to do. Now, I think that was a couple of years ago when I had that response, and I haven't been doing the OP guide in the last year or two. But that was their reaction, and I don't know that they would. I think they'd be more self-conscious about saying that, but it was like, that's their way. I said, well, yeah, but they do live in your world. If they live in this world, they have to pay rent and they have to pay food, and they live in some world where they don't have all responsibilities of others. And talking about, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds having babies, some of them, they're 17 or 18, are coming in pregnant for the second time. And Perry Klass again, like she says to one of them, oh, well, what does your other child think about another baby coming? And the young person says to her, well, it's only 1 year old. It's not thinking about it. So there's a real gap between the parent and this mother coming in, the medical student, and how do they resolve that? And for some of them, it's just feeling of, this is a rotation I'm going through, and this isn't what I'll do. Or just a general feeling that we'll take care of the health, and you don't have to think about the other part of it. But that is not always the reaction for certain. So one more story that comes to mind, and so this is just in case you've been wondering what kinds of things that they do in medical school and things like this. It's Lori Moore's People Like That are the only people here. See, I talked to a group of doctors, they don't know anything. And you just immediately know. And the fact that the mother in the story is, one thing is she refuses to bond with the other parents, usually mothers. She does bond with one of the dad, with one parent who's a dad, but she refuses to bond with them, talks about them in their pink running suits and so on, and they're here in Little Tim's, I think that's the name of the little it has some cute name like that, area that the parents stay in this ward. And she doesn't want to be a part of these people because it means that her child isn't going to be well. And most of these children are dying. And